Michael Barker this morning. We're going to call Michael Barker out again to talk about the 39 steps. And Michael Phillips, who is the Chicago Tribune film critic, and he's the on-air host of the Film Score, a series of specials devoted to great movie music, syndicated nationally, and heard on classical WFM, TFM. But Michael is also the mentor to the Ebert Fellows here at the University of Illinois, and he's been doing it for 6 years, and we're so grateful to him, and we're welcome Michael Phillips. And our third guest is here to talk about Alfred Hitchcock just because he loves talking about movies. But he was invited because we're showing his film, The White Tiger, later. He's been here a couple of times at Ebertfest. It's the Academy Award nominee, Ramin Bahrani. Michael Phillips, who's the moderator? Michael Phillips is moderating. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be a sudden moderator here at Ebertfest again. It's good to be back, and my God, this movie gets a hell of a lot done in 86 minutes. And I'd love to just find out for whom is this the first encounter with 39 Steps? All right. You were telling me, Ramin, at lunch that this is a film you've liked a long time.
Oh,
long time.
It's a classic because it's kind of the origin. It's the origin of so many of the Hitchcock films, but also this genre, right? So the way he mixed escape, adventure, romance, comedy, suspense, I think it was kind of, he had it a little bit in the previous film, The Original Man Who Knew Too Much, but in this one it seemed to all culminate. And I mean, I'm not a Hitchcock expert like the two of you, but I've seen it a bunch of times, but I hadn't seen it on a big screen probably in 20 years. And it's amazing how he hooks you into the character of Hannay so quickly and how quickly you're on his side. That part of Hitchcock is always amazing. And I'm always, and I'm curious what the audience thought, but there's so many things that make no sense in so many of his movies. And before you can think about it, you're just wrapped up in the flow of it, and it flows like a river, the movie. It just keeps going.
How about you? You've liked it a long time, too.
Oh. You know, what Ramin says is so true. I think it was Robert Towne, you know, the guy who wrote Chinatown, who said that the 39 Steps was the birth of the modern movie as an entertainment. And there are so many tropes in this movie that are borrowed even to this day, and there's so many sequences. I think watching it again, what just blows our mind is what a complete, consummate filmmaker this guy was. I mean, you could tell watching it, it's exactly what you've read about him, that every second of the movie is planned, you know, everything that's the way it looks, the way it moves. And this had to be a person that learned the business through every job you could possibly have in the business. He knows sound, he knows script, he knows costumes, he knows all of it, and I think it's because he did all of it. And it was good to be married to someone who is a script continuity person, and when you watch it, you're just in awe. You know, it's like in some ways he became so famous as like the ultimate producer. He's the ultimate producer because he did every one of these jobs. And the thing is, he's also definitely the author of these films. There are so many things in here, as Roger said, and the thing that Chaz read, that that are in all of his movies. I mean, when that gyro thing goes over, I was like, okay, that's the crop dusting plane from North by Northwest. Or when he's giving that rabble-rousing speech, what an incredibly shot scene that is with the crowd. That scene is also in North by Northwest in an auction house. There's so many things that are the same. And then the other thing is this theme that I've only come to appreciate as an older gentleman, which is that this idea of him taking on marriage, you know, the thorny situation between a man and woman, how they're always fighting, but then they have to come together. It's all in this movie as it is in all of his movies.
Just in the very last scene too was it felt like the original version of the second version of The Man Who Knew Too Much, the ending in Albert Hall. This seemed like the sketch of that scene.
Yeah.
For someone who is so devoted, so fondly devoted to the theater, the music hall, anything with live performance, there's so much of that in Hitchcock, and yet he's the most cinematic director imaginable. And I think there's a reason that a lot of us fell in love. That you never forget your first director, as critics will always tell you. And Hitchcock was mine. And because I think in some cases, this is a good example in the sort of middle British period. The direction is really conspicuous in a delightful way. Like when Hitchcock talked to Francois Truffaut in these interviews that turned into the great collection of interviews of Truffaut-Hitchcock book. What Hitchcock really wanted to talk about 30 years later to another director was he really wanted to talk about the speed of the transitions in this movie, and that's what feels like it's 2022 to me. When Hanny goes out the window, boom, he's in a parade. But I mean, this is all in 90 seconds, and you look at. As Ramin says, I mean, in any other film, any number of other films, in the Harrison Ford, The Fugitive, who saw that here on the big screen? Of course we did. It's a similar idea. Harrison Ford blends in with the St. Patrick's Day parade in a scene that takes about 6-7 minutes, and it's not uninteresting footage, but the idea and the compression we see here in an 86-minute film is just still, to me, kind of astonishing. And can we just mention, too, that Robert Donat wears two of the coolest overcoats in the history of cinema and overcoats.
His performance is amazing.
It's great.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say one more thing, and then I want to hear more from you guys. I'll just hush up as the moderator. Your point, though, about how little of the film makes any logical sense, and really how little we know about Hanny. The book, John Buchan's 1915 novel, goes on and on about Hanny's background in a profoundly uncinematic way. Hitchcock took a look at that and stripped that novel for parts, baby. I mean...
Also, I think that in the novel, I think it was very anti-Semitic, and I don't think there was even a love story. I don't think it was a part of the novel.
The love story was not in
He
there.
added all that.
The woman who fires the shots in the musical and goes home with Hanny and is killed promptly in the novel was this sort of raving anti-Semitic conspiracy-addled lunatic who you just couldn't wait to see die, and at least it's more complicated here. But I think there's a lot to be learned from how little the plot logically matters to the audience. Just enough to the action, I think, to make the thing hold together. But as the Criterion essay on 39 Steps said, this is really a movie about plot holes and panic, and that's enough.
Well, he really knew how to hide this stuff. It's like the scene where he shows up in the hall with those people and he's giving the speech, and the girl shows up. It's like you don't have time to say, are you kidding me that this woman is going to be there? You don't have time to think about that coincidence. And I think in every one of his films, there's at least one of those kind of coincidences. But I think that the overall thing to really marvel at with Alfred Hitchcock, and I loved it here, is his the idea of getting into the psychological mind of his characters, exactly what's going on. But also the idea is he wasn't a very attractive guy. I think he fantasized about him being Robert Donat or or James Stewart or Cary Grant, and they're supposed to be like us. And it's easy for us to say, okay, I'm Robert Donat, and look what I'm going through here. But he had a way of making these films to make you feel like you were that main character under the same kind of stress and paranoia and all that stuff. And he did that film after film after film.
And he repeated, in many ways, unofficial remakes of this film. Saboteur, 1942, Robert Cummings has to kind of
Same.
zip across America, clear his name, falsely accused of murder, and stop the enemy spies, right? North by Northwest is a movie that makes the least narrative sense of any big hit I can think of, and it does not matter. A wit, there's we haven't. Who's seen that lately? North by Northwest. There's the crop dusting scene, right? What is this plane menacing Cary Grant? We have a sense of who's out to get him. Originally, there was a script. The script originally had a scene where James Mason was talking to one of his henchmen, and there's some line about Franz. Weren't you in the war? Weren't you a pilot in the war? Yes. Okay. Well, there's a crop dusting plane we can get. And we'll get. And Hitchcock realized we don't need a single word of that. It's actually better if the audience is just sort of like wondering, what, huh, what, wow, what.
Also, Michael, we don't ask why doesn't the car just pull up and shoot him in the head?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We don't even ask that question.
We don't. It's just to your point. It just rolls in a way that we can scarcely imagine, I think, how it really felt in 1935 audiences who were just starting to kind of get a sense of, ooh, okay, this is a Hitchcock film, really from the earlier film, 1 year earlier, Man Who Knew Too Much. It was like I guess the nearest corollary would be the first Bond picture. But it's a very different feeling because it's so many different genres in once. I mean, in a twisted way, this is a romance, and there's something kind of amazing about how that last few minutes, you have the weirdly touching death of a man who's killed by his own professional pride on stage, followed by this intimation of a happy union
With the dancing girls.
with the dancing girls in the background. I mean, it's pure theater, it's pure cinema. It's just
The dancing girls in the background, I think, is great because it's not just the entertainment quality of it, but it's very ironic, and I think it matches his macabre sense of humor. Yeah. But all his movies work, and in this one, it's like moment by moment, it's just one beat of dramatic irony after another. The whole movie is based on dramatic irony, from the larger context that Hannah is a mistaken identity and she doesn't understand that and the police don't understand that, but we know what he knows. But then every little moment is like that throughout the whole film.
so how might that be useful to you as a director, even if you're not making a film that's consciously Hitchcockian or anything?
Well, I mean, dramatic irony is something used in every director, every writer uses it. I mean, in this kind of genre, it's being used, it's on a macro and a micro scale being used all the time, but every director is using dramatic irony. It's like one of the foundational tools of how to tell a story. And here it's in every single moment, it's dramatic irony. And it's amazing how those small things just pull you forward and keep you engaged.
Well, he understood the rhythm of a move. The reason it works in 2022, I mean, think about it. This movie was made 87 years ago. That's incredible that it can still hold up. It doesn't seem passé at all. It's because he learned, and it had to do with editing as much as the visual storytelling. He learned about the rhythm of how we respond to what's up at the screen and how quick it all has to happen. And the rhythm's the key. And he also learned about sound. I forgot about how crucial sound is, One woman screams and then the train does that. Or the gun is shot and you think the guy's dead and you hear the policeman laughing and it comes out.
That train scene's interesting because it cuts to him asleep.
Yeah.
Right. So he keeps. It's not even clear did it really happen. Is it in his head? And he keeps putting us in Hanny's head. Right. There's always these shots of him. He always gets a shot of him thinking, you know, processing. Even the opening reminded me of Notorious, where it's on his hand and his back for a really long time. We don't quite see his face for a while, which he does to an extreme length in Notorious. But
Which has been my vote for the next Hitchcock film I'd love to see.
oh, that's
here
one
at
of the
Virginia.
great, one of the great twisted love stories. Yeah, it's so twisted. How he treats the woman he ends up loving, he ends up basically selling her off.
It's a very sick movie.
It is, but it's incredible. And at the very ending, it's amazing because you end up caring about the bad guy.
Yeah.
It's a great reminder, I think. When I was in high school, I remember threading up the 16-millimeter copy of this at the University of Wisconsin Extension School that had a limited library of about 3 Hitchcocks. I saw 39 Steps, then I saw Psycho, and in my pea brain, my little 15, 16-year-old pea brain, the critic was born.
Is that right?
And I thought, these are utterly, I thought I remember reading vaguely people referring to, oh, it's a very Hitchcockian, as a description. Those two films have so little to do with each other in many ways. Some ways, a lot, but the tone and the rhythm of those films, boom. I mean, wildly different periods of his career, but it's a great reminder of how, if they're allowed to, if they're given the latitude and the support, good directors become great directors, and they're more than one kind of great director, I think. And that's what we have. I think we have this is the one that I think cemented his international image and started turning him into, and I don't mean this in a negative way, he loved to exploit his own image, God knows. He was a master promoter, but it turned him into kind of the first directorial brand, maybe outside Chaplin, I guess, internationally. That's amazing. And the guy was just getting going, now. Any questions or comments here yeah, go ahead. Yes.
And one of the things we have is trying to spot the McGuffin. Thank you. Trying to spot the McGuffin. And my feeling is that this tune in his head was the McGuffin. Do you think that was valid?
Ramin,
The tune he had obsessed
can you talk
with.
briefly about the McGuffin and what that means because it's well known, but it's not entirely known. Really.
Well, the MacGuffin is in all these Hitchcock movies. It's what they're going after, but you never really know what it is. It's just like, it's something that they have to achieve, like in Notorious, it's that bottle with some minerals in it, but we don't know really what it is. And here it's all that, I believe it's just all that gibberish the man is saying in the end. It's that information that was in his head that they wanted to cross over.
Right.
Across the border to the, quote, bad people who are going to use that information against the country of England.
Yeah, I think
the tune in his head is what illuminated him to realize, oh my God, it's Mr. Memory who has this. The MacGuffin is in his head, in Memory's head.
And the tune
It's
comes
those
from the music hall.
military secrets.
Yeah, to
And
build
we would-
some kind of a
and
weapon
in any
or
other
a
movie,
vehicle.
we would care about what's at stake. In this movie, we really don't care. And the guy says, and it's just gibberish.
But there's enough going on in that scene where he's dying that the actual plot, that's the lesson I think to be learned here. Somehow, if you can make people care about more than just what Hitchcock described the MacGuffin as, it's what the spies are after, but the audience doesn't really care. That's just enough to keep just enough glue to keep, and you can get, even in films that are very, very different, like the Bourne trilogy with Matt Damon, it's more than 3 actually, but the 3 good ones. And there's very little left of the Robert Ludlum novels in any of those Bourne films, nothing. It's basically he runs, period. And it's how many different ways can we keep that going, and just enough plausibility about who's chasing him and why. There has to be more than, it's Roger's old edict that never fails. It's not what a movie's about, it's how it's about it.
Also, he said it's different. Roger would say that it's different to want to know what happens next than to care about what happens next. He always said, that always stuck with me, that he said that, and here you care about the 2 main characters.
The thing about great directors, the really great ones, are the ones that really do survive a lot of analysis. And like this movie, I'd seen it many times before, and I started watching it, and you could do a whole book on all the couples in this movie and the nature of the couples. And that's so beyond what we've ever talked about this movie, but they're throughout the movie, starting with
That
the
first-
spy
those-
lady who
they're-
does want to go to home with that guy.
I thought the one that I love the most is the farm couple.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. It actually, I thought I heard the audience even respond in her final close-up when she turns her head in a 3/4 profile, and you realize she wants to go with him and she's stuck with that man. That whole sequence is all, we're talking about dramatic irony. It's all, he sees the newspaper, she sees the newspaper. Now, first, they didn't know what we knew and what Hannah knew. Then she knows, but he doesn't know. Not only doesn't know, he thinks it's something different.
And then he looks in the window.
Then he's spying on them. They don't know he's spying on them, and he's spying on them, and he's misunderstanding the whole. It's like one dramatic irony on top of another one that keeps the whole thing going.
And then you've got the couple who run the inn later on, and it's witty, but it's back and forth, and she keeps the guy under control. It's just so interesting about his view of couples.
Who else?
A question from the balcony.
Yes,
up
please.
here.
Thank you.
Hey, definitely only 3 good Jason Bourne movies, so I appreciate that. I loved this movie. I'd love a little help putting it in context in terms of directorial history. I mean, there were so many memorable shots and things that even today looked innovative to me, and certainly the technology of the time. Like, when they're in the car and the camera pulls back from the car and suddenly you see the car in the landscape and I just love some context on, was that stuff that he was doing for the first time, basically, in this film, with these techniques that other directors had used? How innovative was this direction at the time? Because it was striking to me even today, and I'd love some help putting it in context.
Well, I think this is just probably from what I've read, is that he really liked the impressionists, like the expressionists like Murnau and Fritz Lang. I think he studied those silents and maybe was deeply influenced by them. But I think most of those shots, some have borrowed from that, but most of them are his, I mean, the shot of the bad guy when he jumps on the stage, and I mean, how many times have we seen that used since then? The overhead shot of the guy with all the people.
His high-angle shots are always so well-placed, Even, there's so many of them that once he'll just cut to a slightly high angle and you realize the tension just increased, the anxiety just increased. But that car shot you're mentioning, I was wondering about it too. I was like, oh my God, I don't even know how he did it, It's probably something so simple, but I never did anything like that.
I think it's a cut coming off the...
Hiding a cut in the black.
Hiding a cut, which is astonishingly sophisticated looking, and it fools you in a great way. I think in 1927 he made a late silent film called The Lodger, which is another kind of wrong man, falsely accused of murder, suspected of murder anyway, story, Jack the Ripper essentially. And there's shots in that people were astonished by at the time, in that a character hears the suspected killer pacing above him, in the flat above him, and then it becomes an invisible, a visible shot of the feet walking back and forth, because he's suddenly walking on glass, so we see it, and it was, it's just a quick 5-7 second image, and I don't think anybody had pulled that off at the time, and it was just a wonderful, efficient way of kind of giving you something kind of startling like that. And even things that, the auto gyro aside, I think even things like that we had seen a lot by then, rear projection, is really deftly and quickly used. Like, I love that shot where he just outside of the train to elude the cops. I mean, that's like good. That's great use of rear projection, I think. I think this film isn't so tricksy, I think it really matters a little bit, more than a little bit, how these two are going to get through this sort of ticklish ordeal with the handcuffs and all of it, and just to somehow land on a note where you're taking the romance seriously enough by the end that it works. It's just amazing, and it's a kind of storytelling sophistication I wish more people would I guess, try for it, 2 notes at once, you know? Instead of one note, boom, you know, over and over, or one kind of film. It's, I don't know, it's, Hitchcock loved the technical trickery aspect, but
I don't know if this is working, but we have to interrupt you for 1 second because we have to have a little bit of a break before our 4 o'clock film, which is Gilbert, and we have to let people go and have. So you can make your statement, one last question, and then we have to go.
one good, excellent last question. Okay, good.
Hi. We often hear from from critics, you know, this actor's the next Leonardo DiCaprio or Brad Pitt. Is there a filmmaker who's new or up and coming that could be the next Hitchcock? Or is it a once in a lifetime, never gonna happen again type of filmmaker?
I don't think, I don't know if it's pessimism to say it'll never happen again. I don't know if it ever should happen again necessarily, but once
There's so many great new filmmakers, but unless the entire medium turns into something we can't comprehend. I mean, Hitchcock, he came from silent cinema. He's one of the, I mean, I love Hitchcock. It's not the director that influences me the most, but if you were to ask me which is the one director that you could learn the most from about how to make a movie, it's Hitchcock. It's everything is there on how to make a movie. So it's kind of like, really would have to be another medium for someone to do this, I think. Because he invented so many techniques that we're still trying to, you know, he's just a master of so many techniques. I don't know how you're going to do that. It'd have to be a new format.
Can I ask that question in a different way? And I want each one of you to answer it. Who is an up-and-coming director today that you really like? It doesn't have to be like Hitchcock, but just an up-and-coming director that you really like.
someone else go first, please, quickly.
You mean brand new director?
Newish.
Or just somebody that you really like today.
Who?
I will say that after the third or fourth film, you do look for directors, and there's a few who have made good or very good films, 3 or 4 different ways, slightly. Maybe even if they have the same set of concerns and preoccupations. And actually, one of them I'd say is Trey Edward Schultz, whose film Krisha is coming. I don't, you know, he's like many directors. He's one that I just think, you know, he's trying things, you know, and I'm pleased to see it.
Okay.
I have two. One is, we had this film last year called The Father, and Florian Zeller wrote and directed it. And the idea of that film being a first film in such an intimate place that he shot in CinemaScope, he knew exactly where to put the camera, he knew to rely on his production designer to be very key to how the film moved. I found it like a remarkable first-time film, and we're going to handle his next film. And then the other person is Chloe Zhao. When we had the writer, and it just knocked me out so much how she had made a movie before, and while she was making that movie, she met this guy who was a Bronco rider, and she took him to his friends and his family, and she decided she was going to write a script about it, and she did, and she said she's going to make this movie called The Rider, and she was about to cast it, and she said, wait a minute, why don't I have the real people play themselves spouting my dialogue? And I thought, wow. And then you watch the movie, and for her to have pulled that off, that's a major filmmaker, major filmmaker.
I got to interrupt and let you have the last word. Mr. Barani's to go from Man Pushcart and Chop Shop, and then to see the film you're going to see soon, The White Tiger, in a very different style, utterly different. That is inspiring.
Yeah, Ramin is right up there.
Well, and before you say that, I was going to say, people actually are saying The White Tiger reminds them of an Alfred Hitchcock film.
Wow. Well, I don't know if he's not that necessarily new, but the director that I've been taken with in the last few months, which I'm finally catching up on his movies, is Lee Chang-dong, who made Secret Sunshine and Burning, Oasis, Poetry, and somehow I had missed it in the last 10, 15 years. And when Burning came out and everyone was talking about it and I saw it, I was like, oh my God, how did I miss these other films? And I've had to go back, and some of them are easier to find. I think Secret Sunshine is on Criterion, but Oasis and Poetry are a little harder to find. And there's one I haven't seen yet, Peppermint.
I've seen it, but Poetry's my favorite movie that year.
Oh my God, this guy, like, I don't know. People told me about it and somehow I just missed it. I was shooting or whatever, something happened. But if you haven't seen that guy's movies, I think they're pretty special, out of Korea.
And I like it when you name directors you like, because then it gives the audience a chance to go out and catch up on some directors that maybe they hadn't considered. Thank you so much, Ramin Barani, Michael Phillips, Michael Barker. And we'll be back, we'll take a short break, we'll be back at 4 o'clock with the film Gilbert.